right, good morning and welcome to the Fields Institute for Research in Mathematical Sciences MathEd Forum. Today we have the pleasure of celebrating the 2021 Margaret Sinclair Award winner. We've got a great lineup of talks and discussion to celebrate the work of the 2021 award winner. Before we get started, we just want to take a moment to acknowledge that the land on which the Fields Institute for Research in Mathematical Sciences resides is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. I'd like to acknowledge and express gratitude to the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation of the Anishinaabe peoples who continue to share their ancestral lands with us. Just in general, a couple of ground rules. Just so everyone's aware, the sessions are recorded as we're doing them on Zoom. We ask that in the context of breakout rooms in particular, that you feel free to keep your microphone on mute unless you're sharing, just to minimize the background noise. You can also feel free to turn off your video unless you're sharing. And as always, we're looking forward to a positive collegial atmosphere and great discussion and a respectful discourse. Just before we get going with today's agenda, I just want to give a moment for any of the representatives from the various mathematical organizations, math education organizations across Canada. If there are any reports or announcements to be made, please feel free to make the announcement in the chat. So anything from the OAME, OMCA, or any of the other organizations. So looking into the schedule for today, we are going to be starting off with an introduction of the award itself in just a few minutes. We'll be moving on from there to the Margaret Sinclair Award lecture. And then at around 11:40, we'll be getting into a second talk, which is sort of dovetailing on the theme. And then we'll be taking about 20 minutes or maybe a little bit more, depending on how the conversation goes, to do our debrief and discussion among the group of participants. So I think with that, I'll hand it over to you, Amy, to take it forward from here.
Thank you, Charles. And thanks everyone for joining us this morning. I'm going to put my screen share up. I'm really very pleased to be able to welcome you all to the Margaret Sinclair Award Celebration Day. To start, I thought I would speak a little bit about Margaret. She was a mentor of mine, well known in the community in Ontario and beyond. And she was actually the first person to hire me when I was fresh out of graduate school. So there's a bit of sentimental connection for me here. Many of you will have known her. She was a chair at the Fields MathEd Forum for a few years. She had a remarkable teaching career, teaching from elementary school to secondary and graduate studies, as well as acting as a vice principal. She knew the range, and she was instrumental in establishing the MA in Mathematics for Teachers program at York University. Her focus was really around student-centered mathematical interactions, and her work was in many ways really cutting edge, dynamic and responsive, and I think that was her approach in her teaching and in her research, and her students continue to appreciate that in her memory. One of our speakers this afternoon is a former student of Margaret, so I'm quite excited to see how all of the ideas connect from who she was and what she did for our MathEd community, through how people continue her legacy in their own work. And that makes me very excited to introduce this year's winner, Dr. Kathy Marks-Crippen. Kathy is a prolific education writer and instructor and researcher. For the past 2 years, she's been collaborating with First Nations education stakeholders, providing numerous enrichment opportunities and helping them develop lots of strategies to support their teaching, especially during the pandemic. Kathy is an associate professor in teaching stream at University of Toronto, OIC. I'm getting a little bit turned around with my acronyms today. She was described in her nomination package as dynamic, engaging, and inspirational. She's written 8 books about mathematics education. They're quite popular. She's been described as a champion of all students and an incredible partner. And she has quite a following, over 3,000 followers on Twitter. And she was described also as having enthusiasm and passion for mathematics that was undeniable. In her nomination letter, I will read you a little excerpt. That educators turn to her books, Kathy's books, not only because she has a reputation for being innovative and ahead of the curve, but also because the pedagogies and strategies she writes about are attainable and accessible for the elementary mathematics classroom. Kathy herself was a middle school teacher and later a curriculum consultant for K-8 before she set her sights on teacher education. As I mentioned, she's the author of 8 books, including Teaching Math with Meaning and Math Expressions, Promoting Problem Solving and Mathematical Thinking through Communication. I'm really quite pleased to turn it over now to Deputy Director of Fields Institute, Dr. Deidre Haskell, who will present Kathy with her award. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amy. And it's a great pleasure for me to be here today representing the Fields Institute at this meeting of the MathEd Forum. And Charles already gave the land acknowledgement, but I wanted to reiterate that point. The land on which the Fields Institute stands is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. And I think it's really important for us to remember that, acknowledge and express gratitude for the opportunity to live and work on this land. And this is especially relevant today, given Kathy's work with Indigenous peoples and in teaching mathematics. And this is a important occasion for me because it really allows the opportunity to reiterate the importance of the work that you all do, the importance to the Fields Institute of the work that you all do, because you're training the young people who are going to be the mathematicians of tomorrow. And that matters to all of us and to the work of the Fields Institute. So it's really a pleasure and an honor for me to formally, virtually give Kathy Marks-Kirpan the Margaret Sinclair 2021 award, which recognizes her role as an educator and as an educator of educators. So please, Kathy, take it away.
Thank you very much. You know, this is an honor for me, and I thank the Fields Institute, the committee, and the family of Margaret Sinclair, because really, when I think about this award, it's an award that celebrates someone that has an extensive research portfolio, an incredible educator, but more importantly, an amazing human being. So kind and generous. I did not know her personally, but through this award and through the Fields Institute, I have learned a lot about her. And I think, you know, today is not just about celebrating the award per se, but celebrating her legacy, as this award allows us to continue, you know, to be inspired by her work. And I can only hope that I continue to take little bits and pieces from her life and infuse them in my own practice. We don't get here, you know, our thinking about mathematics is not developed in isolation. We do this through our communities. And I'm so fortunate to have many different communities that have helped shape my thinking around mathematics and help shape my identity as a math teacher. I have a lovely community of scholars at the University of Toronto where I teach, my colleagues. I know Gurpreet Sambhi's here, Ron Lancaster, they have inspired me, and we had lots of communications around mathematics. And a very dear colleague of mine, Larry Schwartz. I mean, he is in the language arena, his research is in the language arena, but bringing that in and having those kinds of conversations are important. The communities don't just rest in the university setting and the academic setting. They go beyond. They go in classrooms, they go with teachers, the teachers I've worked with, the students I've worked with, all of these pieces together. And dare I say, my family is also a community where I learn. Because in that capacity, I have lots of opportunities, first of all, to learn, yes, but they are also my, may I say, guinea pigs, where I test out different things and try out different things. When my niece and nephews were younger, I would always, say, okay, let's do this together. Let's try this out. Does this work? I wanted to explore mathematics with them. And even on my family members, my sister, my brother, all the family together, my parents constantly testing things out, to the point where one Thanksgiving, we did a math talk. I did a math talk. Yes, I did. I did it with my nephews. And then when we sat around the table, I brought up the chart paper. And if you're not familiar with what a math talk is when you put up a question and like 25 minus 18, and then you invite people to share their thinking. And I'm just going to tell you something right here and now, publicly in the math community. Best Thanksgiving ever, ever. Now, my family members might have a different opinion about this, but a math talk and the best turkey ever, it doesn't get any better than that. I'm just saying, doesn't get any better. I'll debate that forever. And my poor parents as well, always sort of getting their insights of how they learn math and how they process different things. And then I also, my husband is a community onto himself, where I test constantly different things. He's also a guinea pig as well, a tall guinea pig, but nevertheless a guinea pig. He's an operations research engineer and thinks intuitively about mathematics. So that helps as well. And I have to just thank him too, because he's provided me, unbeknownst to him, and he's going to sort of learn about this as we go through this presentation, that he's provided me with comic relief for all of the classes that I've taught and presentations that I've done. He's not aware of the extent of this, but I'll just say that on my university course evaluations, the students ask about him and mention, why don't we hear more about Tony? Or I agree, the dishwasher should have been replaced. So lots of communities, lots of learning. And I'm very grateful to all those communities in terms of my own math development. And I'm just gonna share my PowerPoint to, let me just see here. Hold on a second, my friends. All right. Hopefully this will work. There we go. All right. Okay. And when we're talking today, I want to just talk about, what I want to do today is just talk about some of my research and how that has inspired and sort of shaped my thinking around mathematics, and hopefully inspire you to think about mathematics, teaching and learning in different ways, and how we can support all learners through this. And when we talk about communities, I want to talk about First Nations. I have been very fortunate to be able to work and learn alongside First Nations community. And I just want to share some of the things that they have taught me, and some of the pieces that have helped me consolidate my own thinking. Honoring student voice is critical. And that is a thread throughout everything I strive to do. It's not always easy, but I think as educators, we need to strive for that. The other piece is that we need to create a space. They believe creating space for student voice is paramount. And a space where students feel comfortable taking risks, making mistakes, and sharing mathematical ideas, and knowing that those mathematical ideas are going to be valued and respected and honored. And the other piece, empowering the voices we need to hear, means that we need to quiet our own voice. And this is not always easy. We often want to rescue students when they're struggling. We often want to say, oh no, this is how we do. but allowing our voices to be quiet. And it's hard. And as my family members know, my voice is, it's hard for me to quiet my own voice. I'm trying, really, I am. But in the classroom, this is really paramount. And what I want to say about my experience of First Nations, this isn't something they told me. I observed this, right? I observed this. It's embedded. It's embedded in their history. It's embedded in their experience. It's embedded in their practice. And this has helped shape my thinking and consolidate my thinking. So as I share today, I wanted to begin with some of my early explorations with writing and mathematics. As a classroom teacher, when I was doing and completing my master's degree in the early 2000s, I thought, you know what? I want to find ways, and I was also a consultant at the time, and I wanted to find ways to support students in their communication of writing and mathematics, because the theme today is about voice, but voice can be many things. Voice can be drawings, voice can be dance, voice can be art. We can communicate our mathematical ideas in many different ways, and we need to provide space for that to take place. So I thought about back then, how am I going to do this? How can I invite students who are hesitant to share their thinking? What possible access points could I provide? And I just want to share some of the samples from this as well. And it ended up being a book, The Right Math, but it's sort of out of print now. I think you can get it like for 25 cents on Amazon, but that's okay. We move forward. So one of the questions I asked was, if math were an animal, what type of animal would it be and why? Now, you might be sitting there thinking, look, Kath, this is great, but where's the mathematics? We need to ask them about, 5 times 3 and get, this was an entry point. And feel free in the text box if you want to share your ideas. If math were an animal, what type of animal would be and why? The whole purpose and premise of this was to help students have access, because everybody can have an opinion about which animal they think is mathematics and why. And so allowing them to share their ideas, I think really helped. And the teachers I worked with said, this was a nice entry point. My students who would be hesitant to share were sharing. So I just want to share with you a couple of examples with, that came with this samples and this work. I think it would be a bird, because birds, fly in a pattern. I think it would also be a butterfly because the cool pattern on its wings. And you can see here, the teacher took this, you see a growing pattern and you see a little bit of symmetry there, lots of discussion, lots of entry points. And what this values is diversity and creativity, that math is not just about getting a right answer. We can have opinions, we can have conversations, and we can have debates. And that's what's important. We want to empower students to see themselves as mathematical thinkers. And not all responses were what I anticipated, such as this one. If math were an animal, probably say it'd be a cockroach, because nothing, it never goes away and nothing can kill a cockroach. And math is also like a mosquito because it's annoying. Now, celebrating all viewpoints. And what the teachers felt, that this was an invitation to have conversations. Why do you think math is annoying? Is it annoying? What is it about it? So lots of different conversations, lots of different entry points. Or even something like this, we can bring in the content, and we started bringing in some content. This was an interesting question because, we would ask students, younger students, what is addition? If you're going to describe what addition is, or what is multiplication? And even though the students did well on their work, in some cases, some really interesting misconceptions were revealed, because we all know as educators that the right answer does not guarantee understanding. and what is behind the right answer. We need to be, I always say to my students, teaching is like CSI. We're investigators. We want to get to the truth. We want to get behind what we see there, as much evidence as possible. So here's one, and this was an older student. This was a grade 8, 9 student. It is a branch of math where you try to find out the value of an unknown number. That makes sense to me. But then we had a response like this. I would say they're asking the wrong person. How many of us sitting in a mathematics class might have felt like that at one point or another, or in a context where everybody knows and you're not sure? What I love about this response is two things. One, this student feels comfortable sharing that they may not know. And also, what this shows is that this teacher has created a mathematical environment in which students feel comfortable sharing that they do not know. And the last sample I want to talk about, as I prepared for this talk, I realized that I have come full circle. And Gurpreet Sambi, who does research with me on argumentation, will see this. In the early 2000s, I asked this question, is this incorrect or correct? Why? And you're going to see with some of the research I've done on argumentation that even back then I was sort of dabbling in this area unknowingly. So what I was expecting for this, and what the teacher was expecting, that students would, say, well, this is what I know. It can't be 7 because blah, 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 4 + 1 = 5, and so on and so forth. But this is the response. And this had a huge impact. It is wrong because the teacher says it is wrong. This is not what I want for kids. This is not what I want for society. So often kids hand over the ownership of their mathematical thinking to a textbook, to a teacher, to somebody else. And the goal and what I strive to do in my work is find ways to empower kids to see themselves as mathematical thinkers, to be able to say, this is wrong because this is what I know, even when they're not 100% sure. So this is sort of what has influenced me in terms of my own thinking. So today, what I want to just share with you is just little bits and pieces, tapas, if you will, little appetizers of the research that I've done and how it has sort of influenced some of my thinking, and how some of the findings have really influenced my work. So the first piece I want to talk about is inviting all voices in terms of argumentation. How do we invite all voices and create a safe space? So I want to talk about the research that I've done. I've done some of it on my own, and some of it, luckily, with Gurpreet. And that just goes to share, when we started collaborating together, that mathematical community and the support and the thinking and the ideas that we share together. So I want to talk a bit about just what this was. We know that teachers often invite students to justify their thinking. How did you do this? Why was this correct? And so on. In this case, we wondered about what if we gave students a mathematical statement, equation that they already knew to be false. So we're removing the content piece and allowing them, and the purpose is to allow them to focus actually on creating an argument. And so this is what we did. We presented students with different equations that they already, like a grade 5 student disproving 5 + 5 = 12. So in this case, these tasks were explicitly focused on argumentation in themselves, and a task where the students were working on argumentation. The other piece I want to talk about, because this has been an interesting journey, and I know this debate continues in the mathematical community about what do we call elementary proof or argument? Do we call it proof? Do we call it argumentation? And there's a lot of ongoing debate, and I'm sure it's going to still continue to happen in terms of our communities and what we need to, how we need to call them. So I just want to clarify something here from an elementary perspective. Now, I know that some people say, well, this is not, you know, the things that students are sharing in their work, which I'll show you in a moment, are not formal proofs. Agreed, we agree with that. They're not formal proofs. But when you're working with kindergartners, grade 2s, grade 4s, proof is a word they understand. Proof is part of their social language. When you say, you know, can you prove it? They get it. Argumentation, not so much. And I'm also going to look to our language teachers. There's so much that we can learn from other subject areas that I think we need to bring into the mathematics arena in our teaching. And I'm not just talking about elementary here. I also am referring to our secondary and university courses as well. Having access is really critical. And so let me just share an example, case in point here. When a student in language arts writes down for the first time, scribbles something on a piece of paper and says, I've written a story. I look at my story. The teacher does not say, I'm sorry, that is not a story. You call that a story? That's just scribble on a page with some reverse letters. You call that a plot line? You know, the character doesn't move me. We don't do that. A good teacher will say, wow, read me your story. Tell me about your story. They don't get caught up in what we call it. Because good teachers in language arts want to empower their students to see themselves as writers and readers, capable writers and readers of language. That is what is critical. That is what's important. And I would argue that Dr. Margaret Sinclair would agree with me. She would be, based on what I know, she would be on that carpet with those students saying, talk to me about what you wrote. Talk to me about your proof here. So that's where we're coming from. And so for us, proof, argumentation, we use them interchangeably. We understand that the examples that we're going to be sharing, that I'm sharing with you today, are precursors to more formal proofs that will be taught and addressed in secondary and university level. But we need to start somewhere, and we need to ensure that our students have access and feel comfortable and competent and confident in their work. And I want to talk about as well, it could be verbal, visual, written, lots of different modes of communication here. So as we look at this, what I want you to do, and feel free in the chat box, I was going to do a breakout room, but I think it'll work better here. Put yourself in the mind of a grade 4 student. What do you think they might do? What mathematics might they access to disprove this, to say that, you know, to disprove these statements? Take a moment and just in the chat box, if you feel free, what might you want to, maybe what you might want to see, what you hope to see. I'm just going to take a moment and just let that roll out. Any thoughts? Interesting. Yeah. Oh, I love it. Yeah, the concrete materials. Thank you. Keep it coming. Oh, love it. Love it. You're making my heart sing. You're making my heart sing on a Saturday morning. Can't imagine a better place to be than thinking and talking about mathematics. Wonderful ideas. Keep them coming. Because this, and just keep them coming in the chat as I talk, because I just think it's really good to share these ideas and our anticipations and what we think mathematically. We invited the students, the teachers to anticipate. Some of the teachers were really hesitant about their students doing this. Not all of them, but some. They said they're not going to be able to to work this through? How are they going to be able to do this? They've never done this before. So we did, I did a demo lesson with all the students, 60 of them in a library, but it wasn't a demo lesson to show how to teach it. The teachers took what we did and modified and changed it in their own context. But I'm just going to share some of the samples with you. Thank you so much for participating in the chat. That's great. So here's one example. And this was one example that was unique. It had a lot of writing on it, but you're going to see other ones as well. And what is interesting is the students can get quite emotional about their argumentation. You know, you see it here. Do you see number 25 on the spot that has number 6 on top? You don't see number 25. It is not on top. It's an even, no, it's an even number because all the numerals on the number line are even numbers. I love that passion, right? I love that passion. Free thinking in mathematics. And if you can see, and I'm just going to point out here some of the things. And what the teachers noticed was, with these kinds of tasks, students took mathematical concepts that they had learned and used them and applied them in a unique way that they had never been taught before, such as this configuration of a number line kind of thing. So we have on the bottom, you have 0, 4, 8, 12, counting by fours. But what is brilliant here, I thought, is they're showing the number of jumps. And they're showing that, you know, at this point, they wrote 25. You don't see it there. And then on top, they have, you know, the repetitive 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4. And I want you to think for a moment about this, not just the mathematics, but sit back and just think about the blank sheet of paper and having to think about, what am I going to put on this? What am I going to pull from my previous mathematical knowledge to put down here? How am I going to communicate it to others? And how am I going to organize it so people can understand it? Lots of layers of rich mathematical thinking that are in addition to what we observed with the argumentation, and lots of things that the teachers can access. The misconceptions, the rigor of the arguments, the commutative property. Look at some of the mathematical pieces, decomposing numbers, and we could go on and on. So it provided a rich opportunity for assessment as well. And I thought I would just share, because you know, we're looking at these samples. There were also students describing their samples and adding layers to it of their mathematical understanding, and providing teachers with rich insight about what the meaning was of their pieces. So they were giving voice to their work. And it's, I really compare this to an artist describing their work. We can look at an artist's work and gain insight. But once the artist is there and talks about their work, that's where, you know, we get a lot more meaning. And that's what I'd like to think about mathematics as well, that students are describing their work, their art, their thinking. So I'm just going to play this. I hope you can hear it.
On this number line, we made a number line, and we counted by fours on it because the number sends into a 6 times 4, and then we put the numbers 1 starting at 4 to 6, and the 6th number is 24, and as 24, not 25, and the additions, and that's 6 times 4, and there's 4 and 6 right here. 6 times 4. 24, not 25.
And can you explain why you decided to go with groups of 4 or jumps of 4 instead of 6?
We decided to do jumps of 4 because they were easier to learn than jumps of 6. And it's not 4 times 6, it's 6 times 4.
And what does that 6 times 4 mean to you?
6 groups of 4, not 4 groups of 6. So the number sentence is 4 plus 4 plus. So the number sentence is 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4. Yeah.
So giving voice and allowing them to describe their thinking. The other piece that I just want to highlight here, sometimes the teachers combine their classes together. And what they noticed were students from other classes were teaching the other class different things. One teacher noticed, we haven't done number lines yet. And all of a sudden my kids are doing number lines. It's because they're seeing it in other people's work. So it created a really, microscopic or some of mathematicians sharing their ideas. And this is what we want. This is what mathematicians do. In some cases, students would work on this for several days, going back, revisiting and modifying and changing. So even something like this, where you have students in the same class, just to sort of show you the differences here within one class of the approaches. So in this one here, and I love this one on a sample B, I want to start with sample B, because I love the way they say, here's some proof, here's some more proof. I love that, right? You can have some proof and you can have some more proof. But also looking at and using the argument down in the right-hand corner, 9 is bigger than 8. And we are taking away. So this is why this doesn't make sense. That's beautiful. I think this was grade 3. And looking at the bottom, using a visual to show that. And then a story at the top, a word problem. So if you have 8 minions and then we take 4 away. And then in sample A, talking about halves, that 4 is half of 8. So when you subtract, he said, it's got to be 4. The answer's got to be 4. But then we got into a discussion. This is why I think, students work. They're invitations for discussion. They're invitations for us to ask more. They're invitations for us to gain clarity on their thinking. The thinking that they own, not for us to give them thinking that they need to repeat, develop their thinking. So in this case, I said, wait a second, 4 plus 4 equals 8 says half, but 5 plus 3 equals 8. How come 5 and 3 aren't? Are 5 and 3 halves of 8? How does that work? And we just got into a really interesting discussion around that. What I want to do now, and again, I just want to take a moment and I'm going to give maybe 3 minutes, 4 minutes in the text box. I want you to take a look at these samples and take a look very closely at the different kinds of strategies and mathematical thinking that's there. And I just want you to put in the chat box just observations that you see around these samples. And I'm just going to stop talking and just let the students work, the students' mathematical art of thinking speak to you. So just share what you notice, what you wonder, questions that you might have. There's a lot to take in. Keep going. I'm going to wait. I want you just to think about this. And I want you to know as well that the teachers were taken by the diversity in thinking and representation. And in some cases, these were first attempts. So students had never done this kind of work before, and the teachers had never done this kind of work before. And that's what I think is powerful about this. You're seeing paradigm shifts in students, and you're seeing paradigm shifts in teachers' thinking and understanding of what it is to do mathematics. In some cases, this was the first time that students had worked in groups before and had an opportunity to share. So lots of possibilities. And I want to highlight a couple of them for you. And I'm just going to say a funny anecdote here. When I first started this research and there was the demo lesson with 60 students in the library and the teachers, I should have known better. I used smelly markers. So the first 10 minutes of the lesson, the students were smelling the markers, tasting them. It was a scene. It was a thing. So just note to self, right? When we do this kind of research with kids, smelly markers can come at the end. Just saying. Thank you for your sharing in the text box, and kind of curious, yeah, and who took charge, who worked on this is always a question. But if you look over here, this was something that was really interesting because students use number lines as a way of comparing 10 and 12. And on this one here, just demonstrating what 15 would look like. And down below, as you see, lots using multiplication, addition, subtraction, lots of different entry points here, and mathematics that is being shared. Now, thinking about this, the teachers felt, and I'm just going to share some of the findings here. One of the significant findings was the teachers noticed that the students would often be reluctant to share and participate, were fully engaged. And we surmise it's because they knew 5 + 5 = 12. The content piece was removed to allow them to focus on the argumentation and representation in their thinking. Now, this is not to say that we're not saying that this is where we stay. This is a precursor to more sophisticated argumentation tasks. But before we get there, I think we need to empower our students to understand what argumentation is and give them opportunities to do this. So that was one. Number two was the fact that ELLs were fully participating as well, because this did not require a lot of written language and they were fully engaged. So those were some of the things that took place that we noticed and that the teachers noticed as well in terms of the work. And I have to say that this goes beyond. I want to share my experience in K2 classrooms, junior kindergarten, senior kindergarten. This is not part of my research, but part of my work in schools, which is, in my opinion, research, but it's not formal research. I guess for those of you in the crowd who are academics, this is really important to me as well. So I went into a kindergarten classroom with 30 kindergartners. That's a lot of kindergarten. And I'm just going to say this, for those of you who are not familiar with teaching kindergartners, they can be more tough on any teacher than any grad course, PhD course I've ever taken. They will speak their mind. They will tell you if they're not, if they don't agree with you, or they'll get up and walk away. And this is boring, I'm not going to. So I thought, how am I going to approach this? How are we going to do proofs in kindergarten? So I thought, I'm going to put my drama hat on. And I went in and I said, you need to help me. They're all sitting on the floor. They can, honestly, they scare me just a bit. They scare me. Anyway, so they were all sitting on the floor, and they said, I said, I know somebody a friend of mine, and I put these images up, and I said, they believe that there's the same number of dots in each of these images. Oh, they were horrified. That can't be right. They started coming up and counting. I said, I know. I said, but I need your help. Can you please write a letter or just help my friend understand? Like, they were really upset about this. Some of them said, you need a new friend. And one little student came up as we were doing the proofs, not I, and said, I just want to tell you, I know this person's probably nice. They're probably very nice, but I know I know that these are not the same. I'm in there for you. I can be your friend. It was just funny. It was a thing. So I want to share with you some of the work, because I think when we talk about access, it's really important. So this is how kindergartners collaborate. They put a line down the middle and one works on one side and one works on the other. And there's not a lot of communication, kind of like parallel play, but even so. I'm just going to read out what was written, translated. Yes, if Sabrina put more dots on her paper, it would be the same. Her paper would be the same if I took 4 away. Interesting. If the 4 wasn't missing, then it wouldn't be 6. There's 5 in this row, referring to the 10 frame. And then there, the 10 frame on the right, there is not. There's another one here. And I just want to say, and I just want to highlight here, all the pieces, mathematical pieces here, and I'm not exhausting them by any means, decomposing, composing in numbers, comparing numbers, visual representations, argumentation skills, more or less concepts, all through one question. You know, kindergartners can do this too. And this one here, and I just want to say, the person in the middle, that's me pre-COVID. My hair's a little shorter, but I like it. I like it. And the other people floating, one is the person, the other 2 are the students. I counted the dots and there are 4 dots missing. The second student pointing to the 10 frame with the 4 dots missing. They are different because this one has 4 missing and this one pointing to 10 frame has 10 dots. So this one has 10. Lots of discussion, lots of discussion. First student pointing to the 10 frame that has 10 dots. There are none missing because 5 and 5 make 10. Lots of entry points, lots of entry points. And then they shared and then they discussed. They were quite passionate about this, quite passionate about sharing their mathematics. So when you look at argumentation, when you look at empowering students, it's not just, you know, it's also in kindergarten, all the way through. And there they are. And I just want to say the kindergartners, I want to take a picture of just one, the kindergartners holding up their argumentation. Every student, 30, lined up and wanted their picture taking with their argumentation because they were just so proud, or their proof. And I think that says a lot about their pride and thinking about mathematics. When we're thinking about valuing all voices, I want to talk about the journey of English language learners in mathematics classes and what that feels like from their perspective. And I'm going to share just bits and pieces from different studies that I've done where I ask, the research was about asking ELLs their insights and their journeys and getting more insight, because a lot of research is about what we need to do to help ELLs, which is great. I was interested in how did they describe their journey as ELLs through the system, learning mathematics. And looking at, so asking even something like this, how do people treat you in school? Sometimes they don't understand me, so they judge me. They already know they're being judged. Teachers give me the easier math. I can do the harder one. And when we talk about student voice, I think this is a very powerful one. And some may say, well, this probably doesn't happen anymore. I think we're better at that. No, it does. Students are still telling me this. How we interact and how we judge and how we assume. And what was interesting about this, and I just want to talk a bit about this for a moment. Some of the students said, especially the older students who went through the system, you know, the minute you give us the easier math, you're telling me, and I'm paraphrasing, that you don't have confidence in me in terms of my math abilities. And not only are you telling me, but you're telling them. You're telling the class. And then when we go to work in groups, no wonder people don't take up our answers, because you've already communicated to everybody that we don't know our math. So I just leave that with you for something to think about. The voices, you know, what the First Nations taught me, you know, we need to quiet our own voice and listen to theirs. And the other piece is, you know, we always want to rescue our ELLs. You know, teachers get concerned with our silence, but we are actually learning how to say things. We need to listen to the language in order to learn it. That's powerful. You know, I mean, these are messages that we need to infuse, that I'm striving to infuse and follow in my own work. They said, you know, you put us in groups and the teachers get worried, and then they pull us out of a group and give us different work because they think we're getting lost. We're not always getting lost. We're sitting there taking in so much. We're learning about these manipulatives that we're not familiar with. We're seeing how students interact with each other. We're listening to the language of mathematics and how it's being applied informally and in academic ways. That's what they're telling us. And just keep in mind, and this is something that one of the students said, you know, this is my fourth language. You know, I'd like to be at least celebrated for that. Because sometimes I feel that this is a deficit, that I don't know English. And one student said, you know, English isn't the only language in the world. I love it. I love it. Or even, you know, what would you like to know about students come from a different country? What country you are from and the language you speak. Two different students. Do you like your school? What country you're from? And it made me think, as a teacher, when I received ELL students in my classroom, I knew what country they're from. I knew what language they spoke, but they did not know I knew that. And so reaching out as best we can. And I just want to play this video clip from one of my research interviews of students talking about what it was like learning the language.
What was it like arriving in that classroom and everyone speaking English and not understanding what they were saying?
Well, some of my friends like know my language, so like I spoke to them and then they would speak in English to the teacher. So like it felt really awkward, like, you know, like we're not normal like other people speaking English. So
What do you mean by not normal? That's an interesting phrase.
because people here like know English a lot, so like, okay, wait, okay. Like people here know English since they're like Canadian, and like some people that are not Canadian, they don't know English, so they feel awkward, like, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're speaking a different language and we're not like them.
You're not like them because of the language.
Yeah.
You don't speak the same language. What is
Kind
your
of
thought?
the same thing, but like, yeah, kind of the same thing. Like it's like feeling a little awkward. And like we don't understand what they're saying, and then they have to translate it.
So I just want you to think for a moment, and you can put in the text box things that you're thinking about and how some of the things I'm sharing with you might resonate with you. It doesn't just, this doesn't just apply to elementary classrooms. It applies to secondary classrooms. It applies to university classrooms. It's really interesting because in one of my classes that I taught, I shared this video, and one of my grad students got very emotional because she said, this is exactly my journey of trying to fit in, trying to learn math, and at times trying to fit into the point of giving up my own identity of who I was to be able to do mathematics. And she talked about her daughter and how she got emotional. She said, I just hope my daughter doesn't have to endure what I endured. So lots of things here to unpack. But the piece around this is when we talk about empowering students, what does that look like? Getting to know our students and understand where our students are coming from. The student on the right afterwards came up to me just in a panic because she was afraid she made a grammar mistake in her video. Like real, I said, oh my gosh, you speak better than some parents that I know. Anyway, so thinking about that and knowing that home languages are resources, not deficits, in terms of looking at math and looking at diverse strategies that come from different countries, you know? Like the standard algorithm, yeah, we use it a lot, but you know, other countries don't use this necessarily as the standard algorithm, the same one, and their bridges are still standing, just saying. And even thinking about some of the misconceptions that the students have to combat in math class, in terms of the group work, in terms of even how they talked about how even their families, you know, often were perceived as not knowing math. And I want to share with you just some of the survey results. You know, they're talking to us. These students are saying They learn better when they share, discuss their mathematical ideas. They learn better listening to other students. That's really important to know. And the parents, you know, sometimes we think the parents don't understand how the math is being taught or don't agree with how the math is being taught. But that wasn't the case in the research I did, and the surveys that the parents filled out and completed. They feel that, yeah, it's important to invite students to share their thinking and discuss their thinking. So I think that's really important. And I think it's important, not just the assumptions we make about our ELLs, but often assumptions we make about all learners. And I just want to end with this part of my presentation. Some of the students came up to me after the research was done, and this is just some of them, and they said, you know, you're the first person who's ever asked us what we think about things, about how, you know, the system, how we feel. And he said, you know, people make assumptions about us. I don't understand, like, why, like if we arrive in a classroom and you're not sure if we can't speak your language and you can't speak ours, why do you assume that we just don't know math? Why don't you just sit down with us one-on-one, privately, and maybe give us some questions and see where we are, instead of doing it in a public setting where all of a sudden, everybody all of a sudden knows where we are. And then it weakens our voice in the classroom. So just things to think about as we move forward. And looking at as well, and my last piece that I want to sort of share with you is the voices from within, and looking at self-talk and mathematics. And this is the current research that I'm doing. We're getting some of the other research written up. COVID has sort of played a big role in us getting behind in a lot of this, but hopefully we're on our way. Hopefully COVID isn't a real year, but that's a whole other thing. So thinking out loud, teachers' perceptions of the use of think alouds in elementary mathematics and what that involves. So there's a lot of misconceptions around what good math thinkers, how they behave. Students hold a lot of misconceptions around this. And I just want to share some of the ideas that students told us about good thinkers in mathematics. They get the answer quickly, they don't make mistakes, they love math. And I'm going to dwell on this a bit. I don't think you need to love math to be good at math. I think you can, there's a lot of things that I don't love that I'm good at in terms of things that I do. I think you need to respect math, you need to honor math, you need to understand how math can help you, how it can help you in your daily life. Sometimes I think we put a lot of pressure on students. One grade 5 student came up to me one time when I was in a school and said, I don't think I'm good at math. And I said, why? Because I don't love it enough. Everybody else seems to love it. I'm not. We got to be careful with that. Sometimes we can create more anxiety with this premise. They do not need to ask questions. They do not get confused. They do not stop to regroup. They do not need any help. They do not get frustrated. So these are misconceptions that I think are critical that we address in math. And I do not, and again, this is not just in the elementary world. This is not just in the secondary world or university world. This is out there in society of people branding themselves as good math thinkers or not fully understanding what is involved with this. And you also see it in movies as well. So I wanted to gain insight into self-talk, and that's what this looked at. The research looked, so do they talk to them? Are they even aware of their own self-talk? I mean, as adults, many of us are not even aware of our own self-talk. Athletes, there's a lot of research around self-talk in athletes and what they need to say to themselves to be successful, and they need to be taught that. So I put this forward to you today that we need to start looking at self-talk in mathematics as well. I do not talk to myself. I do talk to myself. I say, you can do this, you can do it. Yes, I do, because like visuals, talking to myself helps me. It helps me because I always have 2 points of view in my head. One is usually like, that makes sense. The other one says it doesn't make sense. But when it all makes sense or doesn't, they both agree. Can you imagine having 2 math people on your shoulder? This doesn't make sense. I love it. Yes, I do talk to myself while doing math. I usually repeat the question in my head. Other things I say do include pretend a crowd is cheering me on with epic music, and then I finish the question and say my times tables. Can you imagine? I didn't have the opportunity, but I wanted to say, what kind of music do you play in your head? You know, who's the band? What group is it? And we could almost put that out there in terms of, you know, what do we say? But what we noticed about this, most students talked about encouragement self-talk. You can do this, you can do it. They didn't talk about strategy self-talk, editing self-talk. There weren't many examples of that. So I was curious about that. You know, do they know the breadth and the power that self-talk can bring to the learning process? So I also shared this with students as another means to sort of gain their insight. I gave them 2 examples and I said, these are maps of students thinking. A is they get the answer immediately, just, you know, they start with the problem to get the person. B, they start out, they're not sure, they have to reread the problem, they go back again, they try something out, it doesn't work, they got to reconfigure their strategy, and finally they get the solution. Most students in several classrooms, most students chose A. They thought that was what most thinkers do. In other classrooms, it was better, maybe 10% chose A, but still, I think 10% is high. If you have a lot of students who are saying, this is what good thinking looks like. We have a lot of misconceptions out there. And so to me, this is what real thinking looks like. It's very messy. It is very complicated. And there's many things that happen during the thinking process that needs to be addressed, the mistakes, the confusion. And we need to ensure that students understand that this is what good thinking is. And in addition to this, I'm going to say that learners who struggle, most of them who have a misconception about what it is to be a good mathematics thinker, the minute they get hit a mistake, the minute they become confused, they shut down because they think, I'm just not good at math. And I would also present this to you, that learners who are very good at math and are used to getting the answer quite quickly and are presented with a problem that is challenging, some of them, the minute they get confused and hesitate, shut down as well. So what we need to do is think about this. This is my PowerPoint expertise, people. Look at the little arrow just moving just a bit. I'm not going to tell you the amount of self-talk that was involved with getting that arrow because it wouldn't be appropriate. It wouldn't be appropriate for today's session. But anyway, so it's that middle piece, because I know we engage students in sharing their thinking and sharing their strategies, which is all really, really important. What we're talking about is also engaging students in becoming aware of that self-talk and engaging us and having access to that self-talk. I think this part is the best part of thinking. I think it's like, you know, that caramel candy with the salt on top. Oh, I forget where you get them from. But anyways, it's when you bite in, the caramel is so, the chocolate is great, but the caramel, oh, to die for. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm thinking about. So when you're thinking about think alouds, and I'm just going to talk about what they are, and language arts, there's a lot of research out there, really compelling research, how think alouds can really help students understand reading strategies and language arts. So a teacher will read a passage in front of her students, and as they are reading it, they will think out loud, and the self-talk that is happening in their brain, so students have access to what good readers are thinking as they are reading, the kinds of questions they might pose. Like they might say, oh gosh, I don't understand this vocabulary word. I'm going to read a bit further and see what happens. So so think alouds really help demonstrate regulation of thinking. So I'm just going to share with you a task. We're not going to do this task, but I want to describe it so we all have similar backgrounds. So here is an image, and what the task is inviting students to describe this image to someone else who doesn't see the image. And there's no feedback or anything. They just describe the image, and hopefully the other person can draw it. So usually what happens is that, after the task, we debrief. And I have to say too, that I think we need to do more spatial tasks. We are losing our spatial skills. I used to have to be aware of my surroundings when I drive my car into the garage. Now, all of a sudden, just a couple of beeps and I know I'm there. We're losing, and I know the beeps save lives, yada, yada. I know that, but still, we're losing. We need to do more of this because I think we're losing spatial awareness because our society is taken over and doing it. Anyway, so when we debrief and consolidate this, we might highlight different areas of the image and invite students to say, what did you do to describe this? So that other students have access to the different skills and different ways that students describe the images that they see. And you can think about this, and I would start, I'm just going to say this because just for my own thinking, a lot of people start with that. No, she said, my students are having difficulty with this. Yes, I know, because start with this first. It's amazing how many adults have trouble with this, describing it to another adult, because in our brain, things are very clear, but when we describe it, so that's where we need to start. So let me just share with you a non-example of a think aloud. A non-example. Okay, so if I was demonstrating and facilitating a think aloud with students, first I will describe the triangles in the middle, then I will tell my partner to draw a square so that it's on top of the triangle, so the vertex of the triangle touches the middle of the side of the square. Then I will tell my partner to place a square. So I want you just to think about this for a moment, and put it in the text box, please. Why is this not a good example of a think aloud? I'm just going to take a moment. Just what do you think? And you can unmute and share as well. So why do you think that this is not a good example of a think aloud? Any thoughts? I'm going to wait. I'm thinking. There you go. There we go. Oh, I love that, Norma. A do aloud. It's mostly telling. Yeah. Okay. So you see that. So there's no raw thinking here. It's just me describing my steps. So just a description of my steps, no thinking included, no rationale for my decisions. So here's an example, one example. I mean, there's so many different examples of think alouds, but wow, I'm not sure where I should begin. This looks a bit tricky. How can I make this easier for my partner to understand? Okay, just keep calm. I'm going to break it down into smaller parts so I can focus on one area at a time. This will make it easier for me to focus. I know. I'll start with the two triangles in the middle because once they are drawn, I think it will be easier for me to describe the other shapes' locations. Or should I begin with the triangle on the bottom and work up from there? No, the two triangles positions are easier to describe, so I will start there. So what this does, and what the teachers found, that facilitating a short, brief think aloud allowed them to share and address misconceptions around what thinking is. That, we do struggle a bit, that we do plan some of our things out, and that, we ask ourselves questions, or should I begin with the triangle on the bottom and work from there? And what is important here that I want to just stress is that the think aloud wasn't a template for students, and teachers stress this quite a bit, and we stressed it in the research, that when we're sharing a think aloud with students, it's not like, okay, you have to, do what I do. This is just an example. And then we would invite students to share, what do you say to yourself when you do this? What kinds of questions do you ask yourself? And also including rationale within all that as well. That's really critical. So students can see the rationale and the reasons for the self-talk and how the self-talk impacts on student thinking. So when we're thinking about the think alouds and creating the think alouds, they need to be brief, 30 seconds, not a lot, maybe a minute. And they need to be scripted. And this was very challenging. This comes from the language arts research as well. I know people can just kind of freewheel it, but the important piece about scripting it helps us to think about what it is we want to convey to the students, what examples of self-talk we want to put in there. The teachers found the scripting to be very challenging in the beginning, but noticed that it enabled them to become very reflective of their own self-talk in mathematics as well, which they were not always aware of. So this had, two benefits: being able to plan out, and also they shared that it helped them think about what were some of the thinking pieces that students might want to access doing a specific task that they were going to model. And then the process and also hesitations, including hesitations in there. Students need to understand that we hesitate when we think, that it's not just one fluid conversation. Sometimes we pause. Silence is where we think about it, and think about it before we move forward. So to sort of summarize this part, think alouds lift the curtains on that covert thinking process in mathematics to reveal, discuss examples of self-talk that can assist with that regulation of cognition. Now, I know what you're saying. You're not putting it in the text box, but I know you're saying, Kathy, that's just a brilliant PowerPoint slide. The way you had drapery lift with the metaphor of curtains, I know you're thinking it, and that's okay. I feel the vibes. This was one of my more proudest moments in my PowerPoint, lifting up the curtains. Anyway, so that is what this is about. So I want you to think, and please put in the chat box even one or two, a statement, like what would be a statement that you might include for this think aloud design if you were going to do a think aloud. Just one sentence. You could just do one sentence. Think about it for a minute. Just put it in there, one example, because I think this is important. And these think alouds, I mean, I access think alouds not just in mathematics, but even for my grad students when I'm modeling how to do a lit review or anything like that. They're very helpful. And I'm just going to tell you, Tony's here, but Tony gets excited. I love what you're putting in there, right? Yikes, how am I going to describe the rotated shape? Exactly. And that's really critical. All of these things, these questions. And I got to tell you, I love cooking shows, but I'm not keen on the competition ones. I like Barefoot Contessa, for example. I don't know if people watch that show, but I love it because once in a while there's some self-talk that happens in there as they're getting ingredients and moving around. And that helps me understand and gain the insight of what it is to be a cook and to be a chef. And that's really important. Yeah, lots of questions, lots of struggle, and we can plan that out. The other thing that we incorporated in the research was thinking about how we would make self-talk accessible for teachers and students. And so I analyzed all the research out there on self-talk, metacognition, self-regulated learning, and the kinds of self-talk that were there. And we collaborated with the teachers to come up with examples of self-talk that might be relevant for mathematics. Now, there's an infinite number of examples of different kinds of self-talk. You might think of other ones to include here, but these are the ones that the teachers found helpful. Math strategy self-talk, 2 + 2 = 4, like directly talking about the math strategy in that. If I add 2 to 18, it'll make a friendly number. Encouragement self-talk, growth mindset, I can do it. Connection self-talk, this reminds me of something that we did before, or this towel pattern reminds me of XYZ. Planning self-talk, you know, I need to begin here. I need to begin with this first and then do this next. Struggle self-talk, oh my gosh, this is, you know, this is hard. I don't know how I'm going to get through this. Focus self-talk. Now, this was one that came through on the special education literature that the teachers wanted to include for students to say, you know, I need to focus on this work. I can't get distracted about things around me. And the self-editing, monitoring self-talk, and the importance of that in terms of editing and correcting, and this does not look right to me. And so the teachers found the cards enabled them to enabled their students to have access to the mathematical language related to self-talk and their thinking. So the thinking vocabulary and making it concrete for students. The other piece that they did was they actually, it classify. We realized that students could classify their self-talk. And I'm just going to give you an example. This was work that I did in a school where while the students were working, and I know this sounds really awkward, but it did work really well. We said we talked about what self-talk was. And when they were working on a task, we stopped them in the middle of the task and said, write down one thing you said to yourself, or one thing you just said to yourself, just to help them become aware of that. Because some students are not even aware of their own self-talk. It's so intuitive. But in order to change thinking and to improve thinking, self-talk plays a role in this. Self-talk is our thinking, and you can't change that of which you're not aware. So we actually invited them, once they were finished, as a class, we classified where they thought they would be. Like what kind of self-talk was this? And there was some really interesting discussions. So this was really, really helpful and meaningful for the students as well. And just putting them up there. And this was just the beginning of this. And we didn't think they would be able to classify them, but they were. They were already familiar with the different images up there and the different kinds of self-talk. In another classroom, grade 1 classroom, I love this. The teacher didn't introduce them all at once. He just put them out one by one. And look at the self-talk. The grade 1s wrote their own self-talk. I love this. I'm just going to highlight a couple for you. I'm going to use the big cubes today. Planning self-talk. Yes, yesterday's question was easy, but today's question is hard. And this one here, I don't get it yet, but I'm going to give myself time to think. Don't you love it? This is so students modeling the thinking and empowering students to become aware of their own work and their own self-talk. And looking at the self-talk classification with grade 2s, they used sticky notes instead. And I was in that classroom, they were stopping every moment and writing down a self-talk to put up there. And I just want to highlight this for you. Here it is here. And I just want to, I struggle a lot. So how do I get my struggles away? I push them away with happy thoughts. There's grade 2. I think we could learn a lot from our grade 2 students. And as I finish my talk today, I just want to share with you 2 things. I often, when I work in schools, invite students to write me, just to give me feedback, write me about, you know, their learning, what they learned, what they left, you know, what kinds of things had an impact on them. So this is this student. Dear Professor Lady, you make us talk about math and our thinking, and you ask a lot of questions like, how do you know? You give me a headache. So I just want to say, in fairness, I worked with 100 students that day in different classrooms. Only one talked about me giving them a headache. Now, my family members may disagree on this, that may give more people a headache, but my point for this is that as we move forward and empower students to have access and see themselves as rich mathematical thinkers, it's a paradigm shift. It's a paradigm shift for us, it's a paradigm shift for teachers, and it's also a paradigm shift for our students as well. And I just want to end with a video for something to think about. And as I think about the career of Dr. Margaret Sinclair, I think about all that she is and was to us as an educator. And I think that the video that I'm going to share with you and the message that they're saying, she would agree with wholeheartedly as far as empowering students, because that's what she was all about. Her humbleness allowed people to have access to her greatness. And that's what I think about when I think about Margaret, because she had greatness, but was down on the floor with the kids, always with, allowing people to have access. And I just want to play this because it made me think of her and the students that we teach. And I just hope that all students feel this way about empowering and their empowerment.
What advice would you give a student, because you seem to have a lot of knowledge here, what advice would you give a student who does not do well in math and just wants to give up? And
keep trying until you get to your final achievement. It's so easy. It's so hard it's like math is a journey. Basically, it's here to here. And the math journey goes so long. It finishes at the school year that doesn't do a lot. You need to have a lot of faith in you. And that's why some people have to believe. Some people don't believe in themselves, but you can finish more than you can. You can build empires out of empires. So many things you can make. So many. And I think that's why they basically have to believe in themselves. Because if you don't, you're not going to get anywhere.
Okay. Thank you.
So it's about empowerment, and that's my work. That's what I strive to do. And I think in honor of Margaret Sinclair, trying to achieve what she has achieved along the way. So I just want to thank the committee. I want to thank everybody for being here today. I feel so honored to have received this award. And again, to stress that this award is about Dr. Margaret Sinclair and all her work, and how lucky I am to even have my name on the screen with her name. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Kathy, for that lovely talk. I think we can open the floor to questions if people have them.
Well, I had a question that came up when you're talking about the English language learners and the reactions of their parents. And it was very interesting that the numbers that you were giving about English language learners' parents feeling like it was very important to be able to talk about mathematics. But I did wonder how that compared with the native speaker parents.
We did some surveys with them, but we were more focused on the ELL, so we didn't really include the other parents. That would be an interesting thing to look at in terms of their thinking around students and the tasks and the strategies that they use. Mm-hmm. I think what was interesting was a lot of the teachers felt that the parents were confused about what was going on in the classroom at sometimes, or there wasn't buy-in. And when they saw those surveys, it really had an impact on them and how they think, you know what, we need to take a step back. We need to think about our own thinking and how we can invite parents in and have conversations so we can learn more about their thinking instead of just, you know, making assumptions.
Great, thank you.
There are a few comments in the chat and a question I can read out from Pamela. How do you find self-talk relates to the idea of doing math quickly, fast recall of mental math facts, and those types of math strategies?
Well, I think when you're looking at self-talk, I think self-talk leads to the math strategies and the recall of math facts. I think self-talk is part of that learning process. When you are trying to figure out and understanding the concepts behind like 3 + 5 and 6 + 7. In terms of the self-talk, when it comes to quick recall, that often happens more in automaticity. So there's not as much, I would argue, we haven't done the research on that, Gurpreet and I haven't studied that, would probably be the result of, you know, fast retrieval, the result of having some of that self-talk and looking at different strategies and talking about the different strategies that you're using when you're thinking it through.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. I have a little question. What are some of your favorite manipulatives to include in a self-talk?
Okay, so for me, my favorite manipulatives, just generally speaking, are manipulatives that don't have any information on them. Because I find, and I also just want to talk, I can talk a little bit about manipulatives if you want, because there's certain things, like I love Cuisenaire rods and pattern blocks, because they don't have, when we're doing fraction work, because they don't have 1/2 written on them. When we use manipulatives that already have 1/2 and 1/4, I think we're robbing students of their proportional reasoning skills. And that is something that I think we need to think about. The other piece, if I may say, about which is not part of my talk, but it is part of accessibility, how we treat manipulatives. Like, it's very interesting how older students often balk at manipulatives. They say they're for the younger students. And the only reason why they say that is because we have taught them to believe that. We have taught them in the way we present them. That they're only there if you need them. You know, they're there if you need them, take them and use them. I would argue, and I often get questions around this, that, you know, my son can get the answer just like that. They understand it, they get the answer just like that. That's great. Or a student is really brilliant, get the answer like that. But I would argue that if a student can't represent their mathematical ideas concretely or in images and get it, then they're not as strong as a thinker as we think they are. Because I think manipulatives are a tool to be able to represent our thinking. And yes, and it's not like, you know, when we're out there, you know, paying for groceries that we need to get our, you know, base 10 blocks out. But I think it's important to be able to continually revisit from time to time. Even when I taught my grade 8 students, I say, I know you know this, let's see if you can represent this just quickly, you know, using manipulatives. Tony, who's here, my husband, he's an operations research engineer. They know the mathematics very abstractly, but they're constantly dancing between the abstract, concrete, and visual all the time. And so I think it's important that we are able to visualize mathematics and continually work on that skill. And I think a lot of students think that, you know, when they get to grade 4, 5, 6, oh, it's only if we need it. No, sometimes let's do it. Sometimes I've taught classes when I visit schools where I say, we're just using manipulatives and nothing else for this lesson, and to see how we interact and represent different concepts there.
There's a nice connection back to Margaret's work again with the use of manipulatives and proportional reasoning, and even a connection to how that can turn into online and digital interactions.
Absolutely.
Howard had a question and his hand up. He's put his question in the chat box, but Howard, if you wanted to voice it with the mic, that would be totally fine. And then we can get to the other questions that have been popping up in the chat.
Sure, I figured it'd be easier and faster if I just put it in the chat. But the observation, it's a brilliant framing that you're doing here, Kathy. Thank you. The connection between maths and language arts is, I think, a profound one, but a difficult one, in that language arts have no right, wrong, yes, no filter to them. But maths are typically seen that way, I think inappropriately, but typically they're seen that way, that there's a clear right answer and a clear process to get to that right answer. Do you have any thoughts on how to undermine that mindset, that assumption, among parents and amongst other educators and curriculum designers and assessment designers, all of whom I think are obstacles to what you're trying to do?
That's a really good question. That's a whole other presentation, my friend. In terms of, I think it's through experience. It's through, and yes, language arts. What I often invite my teachers to do sometimes, and my student teachers, is take some of the math that we're doing and putting it in language arts and mixing it up a bit and blending it a bit with some of the disciplinary pieces that we can do when we're teaching mathematics. I think looking at the fact that there are different strategies and engaging parents, a lot of times when I work with parents, it's very interesting how when we do a number talk or something like that, that they come up with a variety of different strategies and saying, look, there's different ways to getting to the same thing. And using analogies around that, even cooking, different ways of arriving at a certain meal. There's different ingredients and things that you can use to enhance that. It is a bit of a challenge, but I think we're opening it up a bit. I think there's movement. I think the curriculum does allow for different access points for students. It doesn't specifically say you must use this specific strategy. And I think the other piece though, and I would argue this as well, that there's misconception out there that we're throwing out some of the more traditional strategies like the standard algorithm of regrouping. I'm saying that's mathematics too, and that has its place as well with all the other strategies. So I think sometimes in this debate, people get their backs up against, well, are you saying that the way I learn math is no longer valued? Are you devaluing, delegitimizing my thinking? And I think we need to embrace all strategies of math and ensuring that students have access to all of them and understand them. I don't know if I answered that, but.
So just two things on top of that. The cooking analogy is wonderful. I sometimes think of coding as testable poetry.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
Right, which is, cooking is the same sort of thing. It's flexible, it can be beautiful, but it's also testable at the end. Yeah. And the other thing is, I put in the chat earlier something that I've come across from Harold Fawcett in 1938 about how he did a study on using geometry to create an understanding of propaganda. It was very successful. The links in the chat thing.
I love it. Okay.
Piece of work. And he didn't introduce any geometry for a whole month.
Wow.
It was all about working through their challenges and interests with definitions and assumptions and the processes to go from one to the other and the implications of it. Brilliant piece of work.
Oh, I got to look that up. Thank you so much for sharing that.
There are a couple more, pardon me, there are a couple more questions in the chat box from one around language. Can math be an interim language between one's mother tongue and English, like a universal bridge?
Yes. Well, let me qualify that. For the research around, we have to be careful because math is not always universal, like we say. There are different representations and things in different cultures. And I don't know if I'm answering this question, and you can follow up if I haven't, but when you use the term bridge, the research talks about how we need to allow students to use their home language in math class. And that can be a little bit challenging for teachers because I don't understand what they're saying. How am I going to be able to assess them? But what we know is that concepts for students who have learned mathematics in a different language, the concepts have been developed there. And so their home language acts as a bridge to acquiring new concepts in the target language. And that's really, really important. They need to have access for it. And interestingly enough, when I shared this, I just did a presentation for code. And when I shared that, some of the people in the chat said, she said, you know, I still think and translate in my home language for some math pieces. And this was somebody who would be no longer considered an ELL. She said, I'm no longer an ELL, but I still have access to my language. And I think that's really important. I think what does happen in mathematics, especially with the proofs that I shared with you, the argumentation piece, is that a lot of the ELLs, I mean, this research, the argumentation research wasn't focusing on ELLs, but teachers were saying, I couldn't discern who was an ELL and who wasn't when it came to the work. And the teachers were saying they had access because they could represent things in different ways, and it was very visual and they could understand it. So I think allowing that second language to be used as a tool to access concepts and learning and concept development in the target language is critical.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Since this was a really rich discussion, and a lovely talk, we're just going to take a little break now before the rest of our program, and I'll happily forward more of the chat box questions towards you to keep the conversation alive. But now I'd just like to take a second to thank you so much. Congratulations on this well-deserved award, and thank you for your talk today.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. I appreciate you being here today.
Folks, we'll take a 4 or 5 minute break and then come back for our afternoon presentations.
I just, are you there?
Yep. Hi.
Oh, just to answer that question, because there was a question. No, we purposely just did disproving because it takes a lot less to disprove something because you just need one contradiction. So for introducing the proofs, we just wanted to keep it simple and just, yeah, I don't know if that answers it. I don't know how to.
Thanks, Kathy. That was a question from Heather around whether in the classrooms examples of proving as well as disproving were used. So thanks, that's interesting. And welcome back, everyone. A great start to the morning. It will lead us into, I think, a great, it's still morning. But I'd like to welcome Mark Husband and Evan Throop Robinson from St. Francis Xavier University. It's a nice pleasure for me as well to introduce these two speakers because Mark Husband was one of my first students in math education, as well as one of Margaret's students in math education. So welcome, and please take it away.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you,
and Amy. We're out in the East Coast, and so it's actually 12:40 in the afternoon. And we also have we've got our other colleague here, LLB. We've come to name her the famous LLB. So I just want to give a shout out to the East Coast, my East Coast colleagues.
Yes, it's great to see everybody. I see some familiar names and some friends and some new names. So welcome this afternoon. Listening to Kathy this morning, I just kept thinking this leads perfectly into our activity that we have planned for you in a couple of minutes. I'll just share the screen so we can get everybody on the same page. And we'll go to there. Hopefully you can see that, developing empathy through epistemic activities, how elementary teachers use what they know in new ways. Before we get started, I'd just like to acknowledge, I know we did this morning for other folks, but Mark and I and Lisa, who's here with us, are working and living on the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. So we're located in Mi'kma'ki, territory that's covered by the Treaties of Peace and Friendship, which Mi'kmaq people first signed with the British Crown in 1725. And as we know, this is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. We're grateful to have this opportunity to work on this land and to recognize the contributions people have made in shaping and strengthening this community and country. And as Kathy mentioned this morning, we work as well in many Indigenous communities, and we are very grateful to have their voice in our work and to work with students in our local schools, which are part of the MK, the Mi'kmaq Ginnamatnui board, and we're just grateful that we can learn alongside them and expand our horizons. So without any further ado, I thought maybe I would just introduce ourselves a little bit more fully and give you a very short history, a very brief background about our collaboration. Again, my name's Evan, and I've been at St. Francis Xavier University in Antigonish since 2016. Teaching alongside Lisa in math education, working with pre-service teachers on campus, teaching our math methods courses, but also doing a lot of work around the province in our math certificate program, which has grown kind of in wonderful ways. It's one of those stories, you know, be careful what you wish for because you'll just get more work. And we do have lots more work, lots of people wanting to continue in their math education journey in our province. So we're really excited about that. Because of that work, we were able to bring Mark on board. And so Mark joined us in the fall of 2021. And so he's just coming through his first year at St. FX. and we're working quite closely with each other, sharing stories about teaching in the classroom. We both come from the classroom. We both have a teaching career in school boards, and we also have some history teaching pre-service teachers. So we started sharing some stories, and Mark shared some stories about, you know, some concerns maybe about his pre-service teacher students and how they sometimes presents somewhat anxious about teaching mathematics, and what he uses for activities to, you know, sort of to nurture an interest and a passion for math education. It turned out we had some similar stories. We had some similar activities that we use that helped us understand, sort of put ourselves in the place of the learners and what they were experiencing. And we came to see this as what other researchers have been calling epistemic empathy, really understanding how students are making sense of their own mathematics, and how our job might be to listen to how they make sense of their mathematics, listen more responsively. And so that's where this link to Kathy's presentation this morning came in. She talked about the need to listen to students' voice, to quiet our own voices, and to bring forward those student voices. And that way we become more responsive to their needs and to their mathematical thinking. So yeah, we did some digging, and we found some researchers who were digging into epistemic empathy as well, often in the science world, but sort of moving towards the math world as well. And so from that research, from that sort of literature review that we did, we thought about ways that we are bringing empathy forward in our classrooms. We collaborated on a paper, and we're excited to share the activities from that paper with you this afternoon. Mark, it's your turn.
All right. Well, what we're going to do is we are going to actually work on these two activities. So as Evan was saying, we sort of got together and we're wondering about activities that we were doing that would elicit empathy for students that teachers would be teaching. And so we were talking, and we had very similar experiences with working with teachers on these two activities that Evan has shared right now. And the one that I had been doing with teachers, in-service teachers, was living on Mars in Base 7. And the one that Evan was working with in-service teachers is called T-numeration. So you can see right now you've got the two tasks. And what we're going to do is we're going to ask that we're going to have 4 different rooms, and 6 different rooms, right, Evan? And in the 6 rooms, you're going to choose. I can't seem to make these rooms, so I'm going to need a little bit of help. But we're going to have 3 rooms for living on Mars and 3 different rooms for T-numeration. And we're hoping that you'll choose one that's more unfamiliar to you. So if you've never worked in a different base, or you've never worked in Base 7, please choose that the Base 7 activity. But if you've never done T-numeration, if you could go back, Evan, then
Sorry.
Please choose the okay, thanks, Charles. Charles is going to open up the breakout rooms.
I was just looking for breakout rooms, but
yeah, I
thank
know,
you,
I don't
Charles.
have them either. Yeah, so please choose the breakout room for T-numeration. And what we'd like you to do is we'd like you to just start working through this task and use a digital tool. So I'm going to put we're both going to put a different digital tool in the chat pod. So the one I'm going to put in is Braining Camp. I don't know if people have used that, but I just put it in, and you can, if you use that redeem code, you can use it to, we've been using this with teachers to, represent their ideas. There's lots of one, I think, on Mathagon. And yeah, so if you can,
There, did I get rid of the box, Amy? I don't know what that is.
okay. So this is the other, I'll put the other digital tool. So we have 2 digital tools in there but there's other one that you can use to, So when I'm hoping that you can choose, group A is 1 to 3, and you can go in and start working on, a base 7 Mars problem, and groups 4 to 6 are the T numeration, and T equals 10, and there's no symbol for 0, and we want you to work on TTT plus TTT. Anything else, Evan?
I think that pretty much covers it. You have the links to the tools that you can choose whichever one you want.
Yeah, I
and
put
we'll
that
be
in
really
there.
excited to hear about how you represent your thinking using some digital tools.
Yeah.
Now, I don't have access to the rooms, so
I see it there. I
still
see the
don't-
rooms, and the breakout rooms are open. So 1 to 3 is base 7, and 4 to 6 is T numeration.
okay.
But I think we should keep that slide open. Yeah.
Keep this one open.
Yeah.
One thing to note is once people start joining the breakout rooms, they won't see this screen. So I'll send a broadcast message so that it's reminded.
Okay. Thanks, Charles.
That's great. Yeah. Oops. Why does it keep going back, Mark?
I don't know.
It keeps jumping. Okay. So usually I can see the breakout rooms, but I can't.
So I can see the breakout rooms,
Okay.
and there's a lot in T numeration.
Okay. Great.
Can you go, you're going to go into those breakout rooms?
Yeah. I'm going to go now. So that's, oh, I see. So 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah.
So they're mostly in T. So are there any in room 1, 2, and 3?
No.
Okay. I'll head into room 5 then.
I don't know what's wrong with your screen, why it's showing like that, eh?
So yeah, when I pop up the breakout room, you must see the gray.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I'll join that room. No, I'm not moving. Do I stop sharing this?
You don't have to. I think you can just go into one of the rooms, right? You can join it.
I tried.
Do you see where it says room 4, and then you can go, if you go directly across, it says join?
Yeah.
And can you click
Join
on that?
room 5. Yes. Dr. Mark?
Hey, Evan. I've got the Jamboard ready.
Okay, awesome.
The link ready. So we'll put that in the chat pod, but that was good.
Awesome work.
I was just in the middle of a calculation.
Save your work. All right, Mark, do you want to point people in the next direction?
Yeah, well, can we hear like maybe somebody from each group share about, you know, where they got with the task, and maybe we'll just focus starting on the mathematics. So yeah, what from each group, where did you get to? Somebody, one person from each group want to say?
Well, I'll jump in from room 5 because nobody else is.
Great, thank you.
So room 5, we started by trying to force this system into something that we felt comfortable dealing with. But then we were given more instructions and more rules, and we realized that we had to treat this as a base system, but we'd added a new symbol and we'd taken away a symbol that we were used to. And then we had to try to understand how to write simpler numbers in this system that we were working with. And we found that we preferred to start with the number in this new system, convert it to what we were familiar with, and then convert back, rather than working directly in the system, working out what the arithmetic rules were in the new system. Okay, I think that sums us up. We did solve the problem though.
That's interesting.
Yes,
And
you're
how
not
about from
alone in
the
that
other
strategy.
group? Anyone from the other group?
We were in group 4, so we were looking at the same problem, and I think we had like a really similar thing to Deirdre. Like we first kind of like had a debate, and we were just kind of asking each other why we were thinking what we were thinking, which was nice, and kind of like thinking about it in terms of base, and then arguing which way things should go. And there's lots of stuff on our polypad, which is fun.
Well, you know what's interesting for Evan and I think, and Lisa, is that the conversations we've had around T-numeration are around this idea of converting, Evan?
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you decided that you would convert something that you were not familiar with into something that you were very comfortable with to find the answer, and then move back into what the teacher wanted, you're not alone. That's a very common practice for most people. But I think what we'd like you to think about next is maybe what it might be like for young people to learn Hindu Arabic numeration system, where they don't necessarily have anything to convert to make sense of the symbols.
And on that point, so I've just put a Jamboard link in, Evan, and we would like you to now not focus solely just on doing the mathematics, but if you could talk about your experience in doing T-numeration. Yeah, just if you could write in a sticky note, what was your experience? And I'll put the Jamboard in for everyone to see. If you could write a little note about your experience doing T-numeration, that would be awesome. Right, Evan? That's what we want to do now?
Yes, yeah. So we'll go back into your breakout room so you can talk with your...
And originally we had talked about like this, like being, we had sort of made an assumption that many people may have worked on this problem. So we were asking you to imagine why this would be good for an elementary teacher's practice. But I'm actually kind of interested because it was so unfamiliar to everyone here, it seemed like, that we actually are quite interested in your experience doing T-numeration instead of just an elementary teacher's. But if you could write about your own experience, what was it like for you?
Perfect. Can I jump to the Jamboard while I'm sharing, Mark?
I think you should be able to. Yeah, you should be able to go into that Jamboard. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be awesome. Yeah. Yeah, there's like, and if there's an idea that's already up there that you resonates with you, maybe you could put a check mark beside it. Oh, Jeff, if you go over to the left of the Jamboard, you can see that there's like a button for a sticky note, and it will ask, and then you can write on it.
It's right under the arrow icon.
Yeah, yeah, there it is.
And I just want to shout out to anybody who felt frustrated or, you know, didn't finish or didn't continue. Those are really important emotions to recognize. So thank you for being brave and writing that on sticky notes too.
Yeah, it's going to help us do our next part, right, Evan? So I think we've got some nice data here that we can invite
awesome.
our colleagues to analyze now, right, Evan?
Absolutely, yeah, yeah.
So do we want to go?
Do we want to go back to?
Yeah, I think we should give them the definition, and then we can have some conversations looking for evidence of.
Okay, I'm looking for it.
Oh, it's right, your third tab. There you go. Yeah.
There we go. Sorry, I had my all those other controls in front of it. So.
And then just
all right.
Skip the next two though.
Yeah, we don't.
Yeah.
All right, there we go.
So this is actually the definition for epistemic empathy. It's the act of understanding and appreciating someone's cognitive and emotional experience within an epistemic activity, meaning an activity aimed at the construction, communication, and critique of knowledge. So by looking back at the Jamboard, we're wondering if everybody can have, if you can find evidence of epistemic empathy from the experience you had in teen enumeration. So we'll go back to that definition, Evan, and we're looking for evidence of this in those sticky notes.
Appreciating someone's cognitive and emotional experience within an epistemic activity.
Yeah. So maybe what we'll do, Evan, is actually, I can do it, is I will put that definition on the on a sticky note so that we can just have the Jamboard showing.
Yeah.
Okay, so I put the sticky. So the sticky is orange with the definition.
Perfect. So do we want to invite people to comment?
Yeah, like I'm curious if we found any evidence of the definition in our experience, if there'd be people that would be willing to share, or I think people need another couple minutes to read.
Yeah, there's quite a few.
Yeah.
I'm not getting the full definition in your sticky note. Can you make it bigger? So, because I just get down to communication and then I don't know how to scroll down to the rest of it.
Oh, that's because there's no more words in it. Yeah. Let me try that again.
Oh, it's just missing the last piece, critique of knowledge.
Yeah.
If you use a text box, Mark, that'll work.
You're right.
Instead of a post-it.
Oh yeah, and I've got to stop clicking on your screen, Evan. Okay. That would help. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, Pamela, you had your hand up. Yes. Sorry about that.
No, I figured it'd be easier than trying to write. One of the things that really is kind of popping out to me is that some people were very excited about the puzzle aspect of it. And, it was fun. And, I wanted to try it different ways. And then other people were very, very hard on themselves if they didn't immediately get it. Or if they fell back on old knowledge. It really stands out to me the kind of the differences that people have with kind of their own, going back to what Kathy was talking about, their own kind of self-talk, where they expect that they should be able to do math problems like this in a very specific way. And if they're different from other people, or if they approach it differently, there's almost this, they almost beat themselves up about it.
So
no kidding.
Pam, I want to ask you something. So that's like, when even that you talking about that, I feel like that there is this appreciation for, maybe somebody else's, like from doing that, you might started to think, well, I have sort of, understanding of someone else's struggle. Yeah. Cause even that evident, yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of the two part, like for the person who'd written like I gave up, there's the part of me that's like, okay, well, how do I break it down so I can help you understand it better?
Right.
And then there's also, there's the other part of it, like I'm very much one of the I think Charles had written about silent participants. I'm normally one of the ones who likes to kind of sit back in the background and just absorb as other people are talking, and kind of, pick up and kind of slowly process it as other people are discussing. So seeing the people who did it the opposite way, it was really nice to kind of see how they approached it and how it helped me to understand it.
Yeah. Anybody else want to say something about the sticky notes and the definition of epistemic empathy?
Howard has his hand up.
Okay.
One of the interesting things that struck me as I've been listening is, and as I struggled with the problem, is that I have a model of the world in my head. And as we went through the discussion, and as I went through it in my own head, there was a need to revise the model. And it was an incremental need. I couldn't start with a completely new model. I had to build from what I already understood. And so I'm thinking about it as how a kid works. Their models are very odd, at least as far as from my elders state, I have no longer access to the limitations of their models. Actually, there's a book that I suggest everybody read. It's called Science Blind, which is precisely about how kids think about the world around them. And it was such a strange way of looking, but I think we have to keep thinking about the incremental part of that. We can't build a model without it's really hard to abandon the model and replace it with something else. It's much easier to incrementally move from one model to another. And that's what we did as we were going back and forth and translating it into base 10 and making the relation, because that was the model we had. And I never, in my thinking about it, I never got to understanding what T counting, base T, whatever call it, the T numeration is like. I have no intuition of that, but I suspect if I worked at it a little longer, constantly checking back to my base 10 stuff, I would have some intuition. And I think we should pay attention to the incremental piece from where the kids are, rather than forcing them into something new.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you, Howard. And there's two more people, so I think it's Lisa and Kathy.
Yeah, one of the things that I was really struggling with the transitions. It became really problematic for me. But something that occurred to me, or that somebody said in the group, was let's use a hundreds chart. And when we started to put it on a hundreds chart, then it started to make a little bit more sense to me. And I realized like that for me was a visual that I could kind of see. And I think about all the different ways we talked about it. And that one was the one I then gravitated to try and make sense of those transitions, because I could think about the patterns in the hundreds chart. And it makes me think about how, you know, different people need different tools. And I think that's really important for the kids in our classroom, because that for me was a real struggle to try and think about like what comes after 9-1 or 9T or whatever. So I want to share.
I was there for that moment in your group, I think, when you wanted to know what actually comes after 19, for example, or even what comes after T. And so there was a little bit of segue into Roman numeration. I'll give a nod to both groups for tackling that Roman numeration piece, but we wanted to keep it with the same place value rules that we use regularly. Kathy, you have your hand up? Nope.
You're muted.
Oh.
Sorry. It's just interesting for me when I look at the comments on the sticky notes, the ones I gravitate to were the ones that I felt like I didn't like the emotional piece of this, and how for me it just humanizes the process, like the thinking and the worry and the frustrations behind the process, and how important that is for learning and just humanizing it. You know, I wanted more visuals. I didn't like this idea because it was fun, because that's all. Just
well, and
interesting.
Kathy, yeah, and on that note, Kathy, because I think what's interesting to me about your work is you're talking about students in classrooms, and we're talking about like sort of working with teachers who are going to be working with students or who are working with students. So the questions that we have are around, you know, like, you know, well, why would we want to do this activity with teachers? And what does this do for them to work with students' ideas, right?
Yeah.
And so Evan, I think we only have a few more minutes.
Can I just add, it's about being vulnerable in our practice. And I think there's this armor up that we're not allowed to not know something, and taking that armor down and saying, hey, I don't understand this, I need help. I think that's part of it too. This is my take on that now.
Yes, and one of the things from this morning that I noticed, Kathy, that you did that I was thinking a lot about is, especially in teacher education, well, because teachers will work with what they know and then they'll entertain us. So they'll say, oh, you want that on a 10 frame? Okay, I'll do it. You want that on a hundreds chart? Okay, okay. And so they start to represent things, but I feel like they're representing things to please me, as opposed to actually solving, like authentically solving a problem and using the tool to frame an argument, right? To frame an argument.
It's a performance as opposed
Right.
to authentic, your authentic mathematical self. Sometimes
and you're
don't want to reveal that.
Yeah.
I like it. It's very interesting. Your work is very interesting.
It's interesting
Okay, Evan,
stuff.
do we want to?
We're just almost at the end. We were going to just head over to why this whole thing is important. And I think we've already kind of captured that in some ways. For us, we're interested in empathy, in understanding how our students are learning, and being more responsive to their sense making. We recognize that they don't have an alternative number system to translate into and then translate back. They need to stick with Hindu Arabic and make sense of those numbers. And just as Mark was just saying, from this article that we read, teachers want to immediately jump in and correct when really we need to give more space and more time and more voice to let students play themselves with their own ideas. Sorry, Mark, I jumped in there.
No, it's perfect. Yeah, and so what? Yeah, and if we go to our next slide, Evan, we can just sort of begin to wrap this up, because I think we're under the time limit here. But what we've noticed, whether we're doing base 7, which we didn't get to today, like the task in base 7, or whether we're doing T-numeration, but that there's this simulation that's happening, that's how where the teachers are feeling similar to their students, that they're actually experiencing what it feels to use what they know in new ways. And I don't know, Evan, if you want to say anything more of that, or are you just going to go into our...
Well, and even to know what it feels like to learn something new, to be presented with symbols on a page that don't carry any meaning yet until you kind of wrestled with them and sorted them out. And so you got to experience a little bit about what it's like to learn something new, which we would argue our young children are doing every day. And it's exhausting. It's not easy work.
And what was interesting, of even like looking at these sticky notes, like we have the range from like, I gave up, right? Like the feeling of giving up, to the feeling of like pressure, like I'm reading about pressure, and to this other feeling around like hard, like this feeling of it being hard. So like even in our data from the experience, like and disappointed, like there's like a feeling of disappointment. So like hard, it's really hard, and I'm disappointed, and I'm feeling pressure, and actually I'm just going to give up. So these feelings that we're having are very similar to the students that we're teaching in classrooms and their feelings around mathematics, and when they're trying to solve problems. So we have, this is what we've been, Evan and I and Lisa have been in the East Coast chatting about what we're going to do. And, we're sort of curious about what are the ways in which epistemic empathy can arise from everyday classroom activities with teachers, and we're wondering about how teachers' experiences with epistemic activities influence their teaching practices with students. So we have continued to have questions, and we'd love to hear your questions. And I think, Evan, it's 1:42. Yes. So we're over.
Whoa,
but you get the last word, Evan. You get the last word, Evan.
I did want to just quickly jump to the references, just to remind people some of the scholars that we are looking towards. The T-numeration activity, if you're interested, comes from Brumfield, 1967, in the arithmetic teacher. Remember that? The Jaber, Sutherland, and Dake article gives us the definition for epistemic empathy. And the base, working in an alternate base system, comes from Zaskas, 99. So if you're interested in finding out the origins of those activities, the references are there.
I think we should give our the last voice to our matriarch in the East Coast, and that's Lisa Lenny Borden. Where is she?
You know, you don't have tenure yet. Just saying.
I don't think matriarch is appropriate.
I'm not sure what to add. I do think it was, I had never done the T enumeration before. We talked about it, but I'd never actually done it, which is why I went into one of those groups, and have to say it was way harder than I thought it was going to be. But I just wrote in the chat, I really liked the way Asmita was welcoming all our ideas, because I had a lot of really wrong ideas at the beginning, and she totally embraced them and wrote them on the board and made me feel affirmed, even though I was completely off on what I was doing. And it makes me realize how much we really need to spend the time with students. And I think that's one of the challenges that we often rush. And in fact, I did it to myself as the time was ticking down. I just used the standard algorithm and carried 1s and 2s and things to get my answer, but it's not satisfying to me because I'm still not sure why, like quantitatively they work that way. And it made me really think about time. And so I wonder how often, we rush kids through to rules without giving them that time. And I think that's one of the things that stands out for me in this work.
I agree with what Lisa's saying.
Thank you, Lisa.
To get tenure.
He doesn't have tenure yet.
Thank you, Evan and Mark, very much for a really engaging afternoon talk. And I can legitimately say it's afternoon now, at least for most of the crowd. It was wonderful to be able to hear some of Kathy's ideas in action as part of the breakout groups in your sessions. And I agree with the sentiment that people have been expressing in the mic and on the chat. This was a really fun experience. And the problem is a little bit, maybe more than a little bit harder than you might expect at first, which sucks you in. Thank you again very much. We'll put the floor open to kind of a general discussion for the next little while. I will sort of step away from this role. But thank you again, and Mark, Evan, and especially Kathy, and congratulations.
Since no one's jumping in, I might start off by posing a framing. Can any of the three of you talk about the applications of games, which are inherently unpredictable, and people have to explore how they work through their current skills to achieve the goal in the game and learn as they go, to the sort of self-talk, self-evaluation, thinking it through process that has been the theme of your talks?
I'm just going to pass that to Evan because Evan's done all this work with games. So I think that's a great one for Evan to talk about.
Thank you, Mark. I was just about to pass you the torch. Yeah, well, as we know, I mean, students are engaged when they're playing. That's their word. They're going to play the game, so they're completely engaged in those activities. And the learning that comes out of that is so rich. I didn't know that Kathy was going to talk about self-talk and how we're talking to ourselves as we're puzzling through or playing the game or solving the problem. But what a perfect alignment there this afternoon for us, seeing what people wrote on that Jamboard. There was a tremendous amount of self-talk coming out of those activities, which is phenomenal. And I think, as Kathy has shown us today, it's how we document that, how we make that visible, so that we can acknowledge it and champion it, and and question and critique and all the rest of it. Yeah, thank you for asking that question.
If I can add a little, so Evan and Mark are elementary specialists, and I'm secondary, and we have actually some outcomes in Nova Scotia related, and in other parts of the country, related to kind of logical reasoning and the role of games in developing that in high school. And so I try to do that with my pre-service teachers. What I have realized is that by the time kids get to high school, they have been so broken from their ability to do self-talk, to think it through. Very few of them actually know how to still engage in that playful kind of problem solving. And so, if we can make this part of what it means to be mathematical all the way through, that solving problems and playfulness, the notion of math as play, as exploration. I do all kinds of puzzles every day. I kind of like, that's my nighttime relaxation. And I do spend time actually thinking to myself, okay, if this is here and that's there. And so I offer those to my pre-service teachers quite often, just as a way to get them thinking about how they would do them with their own students. But I do find it's challenging because we kind of spend so much time getting them to just go to the rule, at least in my experience. And it's troubling. So I'd like to see more games in the school system for sure.
My question is maybe a bit of a self-interest question. I know a lot of people who are here are like very much in the education side of things, and I'm more in the math side. I teach at Dalhousie, and so we don't have an education program here, but it's nice to have fellow East Coasters in here. So I'm mostly teaching like undergraduate students, and I work with kids a lot, but in the jobs I'm interviewing for, where I'm looking for teaching positions at universities, there's a lot of like possibility of like, oh, I might teach a math course for teachers, but I haven't had that experience because I'm at a university that doesn't have that. So I'm kind of like curious about how this activity goes when you are giving it to your pre-service teachers. And I actually maybe also have an interest because I think Evan, one of my friends, was in your class last semester. She's a pre-service teacher at X right now. So yeah, I'm just curious, like how is their thinking? Because like us in our rooms, we are all people who either work in math education or are mathematicians. Whereas I know that when you're teaching, especially elementary education, they're not necessarily inclined towards math. So I'm just curious, how does this activity go when you are using it in your classroom?
What a great question. And just to remind all of the other listeners, it's a very small place, this province, and we do all know each other. So such a small world. There is, when I try this activity with pre-service teachers, I do step back and sort of introduce it much more slowly and much more gradually. And I provide space to actually think about what the symbols will look like first. We didn't do that here today. We wanted to jump right in and just see how that might unfold for you. But to lessen the maybe being frustrated or the anxieties, we think about what the symbols might be. And then we work towards an operation or two, not a three-digit number, but something sort of developmental, just to sort of get people's feet on the ground with it. The strategies that come out of pre-service teachers are very similar to what we saw here today. teachers go to what they know. And when they see a letter beside a number, they tend to go towards Roman numeration in the first place. And when they see that they have to operate on letters instead of numbers, they change the letters into numbers so they can make sense of it. So almost exactly what we saw groups doing here today. So in the follow-up to that, I would challenge my pre-service teachers to try a new problem, and I would give them a subtraction problem with no translating allowed. So how would I use my knowledge about place value and what I know about subtraction to work through a problem, and not allowed to change it back into numbers that I'm familiar or more comfortable with. So what it really gives is tremendous insight into what young children are feeling in their seats in our classrooms, and the trepidation they have to even get started sometimes, because those numbers that we're putting down, we're drawing on the whiteboard, they might as well be capital letter T's.
Well, and Evan, just to add to this conversation is like you and I have chatted a lot about like in-service teachers, right? Like doing this work with in-service teachers as opposed to necessarily all pre-service teachers, because we do recognize the nervousness that sometimes elementary teachers bring to education courses. I think that's what Asmita was sort of talking about, maybe was around or getting at. I wondered if you were getting at like sort of the math anxiety, Asmita. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, because actually like this reminded me, so like for context, I actually had to, I was interviewing for a job last year, and because it was kind of like a teacher's course would have been the expectation in that position, which I like obviously didn't get because I'm still on top, but I was going to use, I ended up not having time to use it in the actual talk just because of how things went. I had some tech problems, but I did like a run through with some friends, and some of my friends were pre-service or like about to go into education or already teachers. And I've just put a polypad in there. I was using the exploding dots tool in polypad to talk about place value, which I don't know if everyone's familiar with exploding dots, but it's a really fun tool to play with. And I haven't done it with kids, but I have done it with kids, but not in person. So I haven't been able to see their reaction to pressing the explode button. But I do know one of my friends, like I think is teaching grade 2 right now. And she said doing this kind of activity really helped her understand place value. And this is like very much the way I was thinking of the T enumeration question, was very much the exploding dots, like we're carrying things over. So that's kind of why I was curious about that.
I saw you do that actually, and that made me think like the base 7 activity is changing the base. And to Evan's activity, like that's the conversations that Evan and I have been having. And but what's interesting to us is that, yes, there's all of these growth of understanding around place value, we think. But what's also interesting, and what we've been trying to argue and think about, is that, teachers need much more than just knowing place value, right? We've got to listen to kids, and it really relates back to what Kathy's saying. We've got to listen to their ideas and what they're saying and their self-talk. So that part of it also comes out of an activity like this.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
I just had from all the discussion, I have a question about time. So we have Mark teaching elementary kids and Evan teaching teachers, and Asmita teaching university, and Lisa teaching high school. And for me, the reason, and Lisa mentioned play. So for me, the reason it's very hard to get students to play is they don't feel they have time. And maybe teachers don't feel they have time. So time is the huge thing for me in university anyway. Thinking of Kathy's comment, my brain hurts. Well, my brain hurts if I don't have time to actually, I've got a wonderful problem. And if I don't have time to sit down and just start all over again from the beginning, put everything together in just the right way and then move on, then the analog of hurting brain comes to me. I get stressed. I don't know, in university, we're facing a huge stress pandemic. And it's all, so much of it is about time. So maybe it's not such a big factor in elementary school. And maybe it's not such a big factor when you're teaching teachers. Anyway, just a thought. It's a big one.
We hear that all the time though, Peter, when we're teaching teachers or when we're even in elementary school, when we do work, Evan and Mark and I do work with a local regional center, and we meet with their math coaches once a month. And we've actually done this activity with them and they loved it because they're the ones that are out there trying to get people to do the kinds of things we're talking about. But that's the most common thing that they hear is resistance is, time. And part of the time is the packed curriculum, right? We took curriculum documents and we repackaged them to make them look like there were fewer outcomes, but we just made sub outcomes of outcomes and things like that. And sometimes you wonder what it is that we expect students to do. And why are we teaching some of the things that we're teaching? And couldn't we just have a playful, problem-based, exploration kind of curriculum that allows all of the mathematical thinking to emerge? But that's me being a radical, probably.
I should have written that down. You nailed it. You really did.
Can I continue that theme? Because it's not just time, it's gatekeeping and assessment. Because the thing that I think causes much of the stress and a lot of the focus is that the things being assessed aren't the things that you're talking about. Right? We're not talking about how one understands concepts. We're talking about mastery of specific mechanical things and definitions. So how could one change some of the assessment gatekeeping functions so that they reinforce the sort of behavior you're all talking about?
So I really need to jump on that because almost all my courses, almost all my assessments are 3-day exams. And during the exam, the students get to talk to me. And so I get a lot of emails during those 3 days, but it's wonderful experience for me because I get to hear exactly the problems. I get to watch my students learn. And now I know what everybody says. There's this academic integrity thing, which we're struggling with big time at the university level, et cetera, et cetera. But that's a whole other talk. A whole other talk there. But
some people get upset about your subjectivity because it's an extraordinarily subjective process, Peter.
Objectivity or subjectivity? Sorry.
You're using your subjective judgments that no one else has access to because it's not written on paper. Do you get a lot of pushback from that?
I get called naive a lot.
You get pushback from students that don't get a good mark?
I'm not quite understanding.
Well, sometimes you're going to give a student a mark that the student thinks is less than the student deserves. You get a lot of pushback from those students because that's where the problem comes. It's not the ones who get a good mark that is larger than they thought they'd get. It's the guys that fail to pass through a gate because their GPA isn't high enough because you screwed them, in their opinion.
I don't think I'll go there. It's a good point, Howard, but I think it's orthogonal to what I was talking about. It's important, but
because that's one of the pressures that keep people calling you naive and keep that from happening. It'd be the fear of repercussions.
I think there's a lot of interesting points that have been raised, and this issue of assessment is one that comes up in every conversation that involves just doing what's best for our students. Because at the end of the day, we are supporting them, but we're also appraising them. One of the wonderful experiences of today is, for me, is this piece around how MathTalk and these non-conventional questions can be coupled together to allow us to rethink how we access student thinking, maybe how we value it, how we encourage it playfully, and then how we reward our students for their engagement in it. Since we're at just a little bit after 1 o'clock, I'll stop the recording. I'll thank everyone again. So thank you all again very much, and for sticking around for this lovely chat. It's always a nice way to spend a Saturday if you care about these issues, as I know we do. So thank you all. Next month, I'll put a little plug in. We have a lovely session organized by Kitty Yan and Gila Hanna on AI education and automated reasoning in undergraduate mathematics. So I hope we'll see several of you there as well. Have a lovely weekend, and see you guys next month. Thank you again so much.